Second roll calls, 1964. This broadcast is based on 28 roll call votes in the National Congress on such issues as the Civil Rights Act, the Urban Mass Transit Act, which was a step toward socializing the transportation industry, a ship owner's subsidy characterized as a grant of federal tax money to special interest groups, the poverty program, the foreign aid bill, a medical care bill characterized as going further toward socialized medicine than the Medicare through Social Security proposal, a wilderness bill which sets aside millions of acres of land for exclusive use and development with tax money by the federal bureaucracy, a mammoth project to irrigate land for production of crops which the federal government is paying people in other areas not to produce. You ought to know how your elected representatives voted on these and similar issues. That is a summary of my report on second roll calls, 1964. The full report after a message from my sponsor. In the report on which this broadcast is based, I have tabulated the stand which United States senators and representatives took on 28 important roll call votes during the latter part of the final session of the 88th Congress, 1964. My general guide in selecting roll call votes to tabulate is the constitutional principle of limited government. No matter what the purpose of an act of Congress, if the act is not clearly authorized by a grant of power in the Constitution, it is an unauthorized act. I characterize as conservative a vote which supports the constitutional principle of limited government. I characterize as liberal a vote which supports the theory that Congress and the President are not bound by constitutional contract, but can do anything the President and a majority of Congress may want to do. The United States Senate broke with tradition and established procedures by invoking cloture to limit debate on the Civil Rights Act. It rejected an amendment to keep the President from using federal contracts to impose his notion of equal job opportunities on private business firms. It rejected an amendment which would have required proof of willful intent for conviction under the public accommodation section of the Civil Rights Act. It rejected a proposal that state attorneys general be permitted to enter cases that the U.S. Attorney General enters. It rejected proposals that would have kept the Civil Rights Commission from concealing information from the courts and from committees of Congress. And it passed the Civil Rights Act by a stand of 73 to 27. The House passed the bill by a stand of 294 to 131. The Senate defeated an administration proposal that would have increased Internal Revenue Enforcement funds by more than $7 million. But in the same week, both Senate and House authorized another temporary increase in the national debt, this one to $324 billion. On June 25, 1964, the House passed an amendment to the Urban Mass Transit Act, extending application of the interstate commerce law to all employees of local transit firms purchased or subsidized with federal tax money, guaranteeing to such local employees federal protection of employee rights, such as job security and fringe benefits. After accepting this employee rights amendment, the House passed the Urban Mass Transit Act. The Senate passed the bill on June 30. The Urban Mass Transit Act of 1964 became public law on July 9 when the President signed it. The law authorizes $375 million in federal grants to state and local governments for planning, equipping, and purchasing transportation systems. It is thus a clear step toward socializing the transportation industry. Senator Frank Lausche, Ohio Democrat, estimates that it will cost taxpayers billions of dollars within a few years. On July 21, 1964, the Senate passed a bill amending the Merchant Marine Act of 1936. This bill provides that American ship owners will be paid from the federal treasury the difference between actual ship construction cost and the cost of the same ship if it had been built by the lowest bidder when the lowest bidder is not used. Senator Frank Lausche says that this bill grants taxpayers money to special interest groups. The Senate rejected an amendment to the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, President Johnson's poverty bill, which would have required approval by state governors before the initiation of a federal poverty program involving any local or state government. The Senate also rejected an amendment to eliminate the youth conservation camps from the poverty program. and the Senate passed the bill on July 23rd. The House passed it on August 8th. The President signed it into law August 20. On June 10, the House passed a bill authorizing foreign aid programs for the 1965 fiscal year. On July 1, the House passed a bill appropriating $3,316,572,000 to pay for the foreign aid programs authorized. At the time this broadcast was prepared, the Senate had not yet acted on foreign aid authorization or appropriations. Some conservatives hoped that a foreign aid bill might not be passed at all in 1964. Others feared last-minute Senate action to approve everything the House had approved. On July 21, the House passed a bill to create a special 14-member National Commission on Technology, Automation, and Economic Progress. The commission would cooperate with cabinet officers in working on legislative recommendations to be made to the President and to Congress by January 1, 1966. Recommendations involving the federal government in the planning of industry and labor forces for the future. The commission was authorized to spend $2 million. On July 28, the House passed a bill permitting self-employed commercial fishermen, approximately 117,500 in number, to receive at taxpayers' expense medical care and hospitalization at hospitals operated by the U.S. Public Health Service. Opponents of the bill say it goes further toward socialized medicine than the Social Security approach to Medicare. In every election year since the Social Security Act was passed in 1936, Congress has increased Social Security benefits. In the 1964 election year, the House passed a bill increasing Social Security taxes, increasing benefits by 5%, extending compulsory coverage to self-employed medical doctors and interns, and making Social Security coverage available to police and firemen if state and local governments approve. On July 30, 1964, the House passed a bill to establish a national wilderness preservation system. The bill places more than 9 million acres of federally owned lands under a wilderness system controlled by the Secretaries of Agriculture and Interior, and authorizes future acquisition of private lands to be included in the system. All land in the system will be retained in primitive condition. No roads or other man-made construction or objects will be permitted except as desired and authorized by federal administrators. The President may permit prospecting for water resources, establishment of reservoirs, construction of public power projects and transmission lines, and construction of any other facilities which the President considers in the public interest. Such wilderness preservation legislation has been under consideration since 1949. This is the first time the House has acted on it. In the House, there was only one conservative vote against this wilderness bill, that of Joe Poole, Texas Democrat. In eastern Wisconsin, there is an area containing unusual geological formations resulting from the Ice Age. Most of the area is in a state park. In August 1964, a majority of the House approved, but a technicality kept the House from passing, a bill which would have granted $800,000 in federal funds to the state of Wisconsin for operating the Ice Age Park, and an undetermined amount of federal money annually on a share-cost basis with Wisconsin. Most of the land involved is in the district of U.S. Representative William K. Van Pelt, a Republican, who voted against the bill to provide for federal participation. On August 3, 1964, the House passed a bill authorizing $47 million for construction of 3 irrigation projects in the upper Colorado River Basin. The area to be irrigated is used mainly to grow crops which the federal government says are already in surplus, and which in other areas the government is spending great amounts of tax money to keep people from growing. The International Commission for Supervision and Control of Laos is composed of representatives from Canada, India, and Poland. On July 23, 1962, a 14-nation conference at Geneva gave the Commission the task of supervising the new neutralist coalition government in Laos. The United States agreed to pay 17.6% of the total annual cost of the Commission. The agreement which has had the effect of giving communists virtual control of layoffs after millions of American tax dollars had been spent to save layoffs from communism, was never submitted to the U.S. Senate for advice and consent. Nonetheless, in August 1964, Congress passed a bill enabling the U.S. government to pay its share of the Layoffs Commission costs. I tabulated as conservative the votes against this expenditure of tax money to implement an international agreement which has served the cause of communism and which was never formally submitted for Senate approval as a treaty. Before going to the polls this year, voters ought to know how their elected representatives in Washington stood when the roll was called for them to stand up and be counted on such important issues as I have mentioned. In the report on which this broadcast is based, I tabulated the actual voting of all U.S. senators and representatives on these issues. All who order copies of this broadcast will receive the tabulations, together with brief, factual explanations of the bills involved. I have a special request of you now. If you approve of my broadcast, please let my sponsors know and support them in every way you can. It takes a special kind of courage for businessmen to sponsor my kind of commentary. It is most important for them to know that you appreciate them. And it is also important in this election year for all of you, before you go to the polls, to know how your representatives in Washington have been voting. Goodbye. God bless you. For the documented text of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 473. Second roll calls, 1964. 6 copies, $1.